Hey everybody, this is Terry from Jafffa Adventures. Welcome to the channel. Before we get stuck back into the build, I thought we'd hit the reset button and I would show you exactly the look that I'm after and the look that I'm not. Now, if one of these photos is your car, no disrespect intended, it's just not the look I'm looking for. I refer to a double hump in a lot of my videos, and this is exactly what I mean by that double hump. I don't particularly care for that look, so I'm trying to steer away from that. This is that double hump on a car itself, and you can see you've got the original hump for the Landcruiser 200, and then you've got this extra hump that runs down the entire length of the bonnet. I'm not keen on that look. This is more the look that I'm after. Still using the 79 series bonnet scoop bulge, but a much more clean line. You can see this is the original 200 series line here, and it's carried through the length of the 200 bonnet, and this is showing at a slightly different angle, but I prefer those clean lines and simpler lines much better than that double hump. So that's the look I'm chasing. Let's get stuck into it. So picking up where we left off at the last episode, the next step for me is to scribe this arc here and cut the back of this bonnet scoop so that it lines up with the arc on the 200 series bonnet. So let's get stuck into that. One handy dandy scribe. Okay, we've got our scribe line. Now I'll run a piece of tape along there to use as my guide for my cutting edge. And it just so happens that this tape is the same width as that ridge that runs along the back of the 200 bonnet. So that is very handy, which means I can basically use the top of this tape as the edge to cut from. And there we have it. Okay, I've got this back edge trimmed along the same arc as the 200 series bonnet, and that lays in there quite nicely. Okay, so now I've moved up to the front of the bonnet. And talking aloud to the camera actually will help a little bit, help sort of consolidate my thoughts. But what I'm thinking is cutting this here and cutting this here, taking that center piece out and discarding it, and then moving this piece forward and welding it there. There is a small taper here, so I will have to cut this one down the guts and weld it out there, and then fill the bit that's missing out of the guts. But I think that's probably the best way to go. That'll get this shortened for me like I need, and it'll preserve that curve. Okay, I've got to cut this very square. So I measured that distance there, and that distance there, and then the same. Scribe a line there. And then we'll run our piece of tape along there, and that'll be the first cut. I won't cut this second edge, because I want to slide that up in there and get the distance of how much I've got to take out of here correct.
So I basically need to cut that right there to be able to weld those two together, and then cut it down the guts and spread it out so that these two sides line up, and then fill in the middle slightly. Okay, that line looks reasonably true. That line looks reasonably true. And we just need to make sure that these 2 points at the end of the hump are equidistant. And if we use that part of the bonnet, that's 195 to the edge of that line. And that's also 195 to the edge of that line. So that then squares up this back edge for cutting. So I can now scribe that, cut that, and then it's just a matter of chopping that in half and shifting it out. Okay, here's a little cock up on my behalf that I'm going to have to sort out. Obviously, we need to cut a hole in the 200 series top skin to fit this bonnet on, to put this bonnet scoop on. And this line from this hump is meant to go straight over onto that hump there. And I've cut too much material off, so I've got to fill this here. So I got the piece that I chopped it off. I'll have to weld that back on so that I've got enough material here to do that fill. Bit of a ball ache, but shit happens. At least when you're working with steel, you can fix stuff like this. When you're working with timber and you make a bad cut, she's all over. All right, I've cut my little cock-up panels. So I'll take that over the MIG and just tack that in place. And the same holds true for the other side. Cock up fixed, 2 panels welded in place. Now the next step is got to cut this down the guts so that I can spread these 2 pieces out and line those 2 hollows up. All right, that's being chopped down the guts now. That hump's lined up. That hump's lined up. And we've got a fill of about 10 mil. So not a lot, but makes all the difference. Next step, we'll weld that to that, that to that, and then do the fill. Pop our magnet down. That's it right there. So those 2 panels are now welded in, and that groove is looking good. So the next thing that I will do is I will fill in this little 10 mil gap here. So we're now all cut and shut, and that's sitting in the position that it should be sitting. The next thing that I'll do is go around with a pencil and trace around the perimeter of the bonnet scoop, and then I will get the sander and sand off the 200 series bonnet down to bare metal, and that'll allow me to obviously weld this onto the 200. Now the reason that I cut that hole in the bonnet there was just to give that section a little bit of relief. Because as you can see, that dips down below the surface of the bonnet. So that allows this panel to sit much more flat. So we're at a stage now where we can cut the skin on the 200 series bonnet. So what my plan is, I'm going to tack weld this back edge, and that'll lock this bonnet scoop down so it doesn't move forward or back or shift side to side. I'll then tack screw these sides down so that they lay nice and flat, and any other areas that sit proud of the 200 series bonnet. And then I'll go around and mark it with a marker. I'll then undo these tack screws and cut these welds off, take the bonnet scoop off, and I'll take the angle grinder and run it in and around that area that I've marked. So I can now run some tack screws down into the side of this panel. Then we'll mark it. Cut these welds off, get rid of the bonnet scoop, and cut the 200 skin. Bonnet scoop is secured down on top of the 200, and the next step is we'll mark that with a pen and then trim out the 200 skin. Alrighty, skin is cut. So this tape. Okay, let's pop the skin off. And there's our scoop. Before I weld the scoop down to the 200 series skin, I'll go ahead and weld up these panels all fully, just so that I can still get to the underside if I have to. So these panels are now fully welded in, which is great. Just got do a little bit of panel beating and some shrinking to take a couple of those waves out. The next thing I will do is take this scoop off and fill those two back squirter holes. Once that's finished, we're ready to weld this scoop in place permanently. Pretty happy with the way that it's turned out so far. Just a handy little tip, or just a watch out for this, for those 200 series owners out there. That spot there And the same spot 2 struts over are where a little bit of rust is starting to form. Now what clips up in there are those little push-in connectors or clips that hold the ductwork for the intercooler. And I suspect when the bonnet's in the closed position, that's a spot where water pools and it can obviously rust. So if you've got a 200, just an area you probably want to keep an eye out on. Well, this is the last time that we're going to see a gaping hole in this bonnet, because the next step for me is to put the bonnet scoop in position and weld it in place. Exciting times. It's starting to come together, which is pretty bloody cool.